Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on Level Up Law. We're here at South Carolina Legal Services. We are leveling up your legal knowledge on the different areas of law we practice in. I'm Susan Ingalls, Senior Staff Attorney, and I'll be the moderator of the webinar today. We're joined today by South Carolina Legal Services lead veteran attorney, Kory Strain, out of our Charleston office. Kory will be sharing information on correcting military records. In particular, he'll be discussing record requests and discharge upgrades. This webcast is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for South Carolina Legal Services later this week, along with the slides that Kory will be using today. Now, remember, this is not legal advice, but just general information for the public. You should always consult with an attorney for any specific legal issues that you have. We'll provide information on how to apply for our free legal assistance at South Carolina Legal Services at the end of the webcast. All attendees will be in listen-only mode today, but do be sure to put any questions you have in the question box. We definitely want you to do that. As time allows, Kory will provide some general information to hopefully answer any questions that you have. Again, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's get started. Kory?
Good afternoon. My name is J Kory Strain, and I'm an attorney with South Carolina Legal Services in our Charleston office. I'm also the veteran law lead attorney. So today I'll be discussing how to request some common military records you may need, as well as how to request a discharge upgrade or a correction of records as appropriate. So now I've talked a little bit about myself and what we're going to be doing today. I am going to start with a little bit about South Carolina Legal Services, how to qualify for our office's assistance, and how to apply. Afterwards, we'll go into a discussion about the request for some of the military records or ID cards. At that point, we'll take a little bit of a break. So if anyone has questions, that would be a good time to ask. Feel free to put those in as we are presenting or waiting for that break. And then after the question section, we will proceed and talk a little bit about general information for how to get a discharge upgrade, as well as how to do a request for correction of military records. So South Carolina Legal Services is a statewide nonprofit law firm, and our goal is to protect the rights and represent the interests of low-income South Carolinians. Because of that, in order to qualify for our services under most of our grants, you do have to meet income and asset requirements. So if you do think you would qualify, which is you have limited income and assets, you do want to go ahead and apply to get more information than we can provide in a session such as today, or you have specific questions or you need someone to assist you in this process, please feel free to go ahead and call our intake office. The toll-free number is on the screen now. It's 1-888-346-5592. And that number is open Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. It is for the entire state, so the line can be busy at times. If you do get disconnected before you get placed through with someone, please just call right back and call again. It might take a few times depending on how much traffic there is at that point in the day. Alternatively, you can apply online for some issues if you are comfortable using a computer. You can do so at our website, which is www.lawhelp.org/SC, and if you put /online-intake, it should go directly to that online process. However, if you do have an emergency, you've been served with court papers, or you have some immediate deadline, particularly if it's anything that's 30 days or less, instead of going through that process, you should instead contact your local office, the closest office to you, and I will have those locations listed at the end of the presentation, as well as the main office line, so you can call them in that case. So to get a little more detail about qualifying for our services, if your household income is 125% of the federal poverty level or lower, then you will qualify based on income, and the asset limit is $15,000 in countable assets. That will exclude things such as the house you're living in and your primary vehicle you're driving in. There might be some other exceptions which they'll go through, but essentially if your other assets aren't over $15,000 and you're at 125% federal poverty level or lower, you should qualify for our services based on the income and asset tests. Just as an example, for a family of four, 125% federal poverty level is currently $32,750 annually. And on the next slide, I will have a chart for both 125% and 200%. So 200% is important because if you're over 125% of federal poverty level, but within 200%, then we might be able to approve you for a qualification as well. We'll have to get more information, some expenses and information about your income in order to ask for a waiver in those cases. But that is the range where we can ask for a waiver. If you're above 200% of federal poverty level, you will not qualify for our general funding. And it is important to note when you're doing these income tests, it is your entire income. It's not limited to taxable income, which might be an issue for any veterans and attendants who have 100% service-connected disability. That, if you're a single individual household, will usually put you over the 200% level. So you probably would not qualify under our standard grant. Fortunately, we do have some other grants which allow us to go over those asset or income limits. The main ones are going to be for individuals who are 60 years or older. That's our Title IIIB funding. Or if you've been a victim of a crime, that could be financial crime as well as something like domestic abuse or physical abuse or neglect. And you have civil legal issues that are coming as a result of those crimes, we can sometimes assist beyond those limits as well under our VOCA funding. Finally, one of our main qualifications is also you will have to be a U.S. citizen, which wouldn't be an issue for veterans. However, we can sometimes help non-U.S. citizens, but those are in very limited situations. I believe the main one would be if you have been a victim of a crime and are applying for a U visa. So here's an example of the 125% federal poverty level. It is broken down by income annually, monthly, twice a month, etc. So you can look first, you find the number of individuals in your household, and then you add up the income for everyone in the household and find yourself on that chart. If you're below those numbers, then you should qualify based on income as long as you don't go over our asset limit. I do encourage you to apply if you need assistance. The next chart is the 200%. So if you're within these levels, you should still apply. We just will have to get more information and have to ask for a waiver before we're able to assist you. But if you're over this level and you're not 60 years or older or a victim of a crime, you most likely will not qualify for our services. If you would like to, you can still apply. They will check this information early in the application process. And if you don't qualify, they will inform you of such and they will refer you to some private attorneys or other organizations which might be able to assist you with your issues. So that's a little bit about our firm and qualifying for it as well as how to apply. Now we're just going to go ahead and get into discussions about military records. Before I get into how to request them, this is a list of some of the military records we are going to discuss and cover in this presentation. One of the most frequent ones you will see, and what most people should have, if you do not have one, you should request one if you're a veteran, is your report of separation. For most veterans, that's going to be on a form DD-214. However, there are some equivalents which might have been issued, particularly for older veterans. Regardless, you'll use the same request form and they will give you the appropriate form depending on what was in use at the time of your separation. The DD-214 and equivalents are a summary of your military service. They should have some basic information on your training and education as well as some awards. And then they have the character of your separation with a brief narrative. As important to just note, there are two different kinds of DD-214. You can request a deleted or undeleted. I would recommend requesting the undeleted because you will need that for some applications such as benefits. One of the other main records you'll run into or you might hear about, especially if you're considering applying for benefits, is going to be your official military personnel file. From here on out, I'll use the abbreviation OMPF. And that is an administrative record of your service. It should include your duty stations, training, awards, disciplinary actions, and a lot of original military personnel files will also include some health records, but they will not include clinical records. So health records are usually going to be your routine exams, as well as outpatient treatment, dental care, mental health care. Those are going to be a part of a lot of the personnel files, but not all of them. And clinical records, which shouldn't be part of the file, are going to be when you were actually hospitalized or admitted. For those, you'd have to request the health records separately, which is why it's the next category, medical and health records. So you will need to request medical and health records. They might not all be included in your personnel file. It is important to request those for a variety of reasons. If you're considering applying for disability benefits, that's very important, since you'll need to review those to find a service-connected injury or event which exacerbated a pre-existing injury. Another brief record or request we'll talk about are replacement medals. So you can request replacement medals. Those are usually free for veterans to request. However, there might be fees in some situations. Usually you're going to run into a fee for some next of kin requesting the replacement medals on behalf of a deceased veteran, or if you're requesting documents that are considered archival records. So if someone's separation from the military, retirement, or if they passed in service, if that date is 62 years or older, then it's considered an archival record, and then there's usually a nominal fee associated with those requests. The next two aren't really records per se, but they're identification cards you may need. They're a good idea to get if you do qualify. The first one is the Veteran Health Identification Card, which is an identification card you can receive if you qualify for and are enrolled in VA healthcare. It's more expansive since it does have some use within healthcare as well. But on top of that, you can use the VHIC as an ID card for other purposes outside of the VA. For instance, it can be used as proof that you're a veteran if you're dealing with businesses or other entities that offer a discount for veterans. So that can be a useful ID card to get, and it might reduce the amount of times you'll have to share your DD-214 in order to prove you're a veteran. The other card is going to be the Veteran Identification Card, which you can get as long as you did serve and you weren't discharged dishonorably. They have an online request for that. It's not going to have the added benefits with the VA healthcare. If you qualify for VA healthcare, though, you should have the VHIC since it does have more uses. But if you are a veteran and you don't qualify for healthcare, you can still get an ID card. It is an online process, but it's not too difficult to request that, and we will discuss that right before the break. So before I get into the record request, a lot of records are going to be with the National Personnel Records Center, and it's important to note they currently do have restrictions in place due to COVID-19. The current restriction, which they're calling phase 1, this is when they're phasing back into doing services, started on June 24th, 2020. There's currently no date for the end of phase 1 or estimate that has been posted, so we don't know how long this is going to go on, but it's currently ongoing. And during this time, they're only accepting applications for limited situations. You need to either be a homeless veteran who is seeking shelter, have a medical emergency, trying to arrange funeral services for a veteran, be making a home loan application, or have an employment opportunity where you need those records. And in that case, if you do fall under one of those exceptions, you can still go ahead and make the record request, and you should. You'll use the standard form SF-180, which we'll discuss in more detail in the next slide, and you should fax it to the National Personnel Record Center's Service Center at the fax number listed on the screen, which is 314-801-0764. I would recommend that you include which one of the limited situations applies to you in your record request form. Either you can do it as a cover on your fax or also on the standard form SF-180 when you're checking the reason for requesting the records. Check the box if it applies. If it's not one that's listed specifically, for instance, loan applications and employment will be listed, but funeral services are not, then you'll check the other box, and I would specify which one of the exceptions applies in the little description line below that for others. Now, phase 2 will start once phase 1 is ended. Unfortunately, I don't have an estimate of when that will be, but with phase 2, they will continue to do the emergency requests listed above, but also start doing all requests for reports of separations. So they'll let you request a DD-214 again at that time, regardless of your reason for requesting it, even if you don't have one of the emergencies. So that will be when you can go ahead and you should request your DD-214 at that time if you do not already have one. Phase 3 is when they will resume all record requests, but that will not be until sometime after phase 2. Phase 2 will probably last until they can work on some of the backlog that's caused by the current delay. So it's hard to estimate how long that'll last. It just depends on how backed up the record requests are when it approaches Phase 2. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to request a report of separation, which is your DD-214. Now, if you have and are comfortable with online record request, I do recommend doing so. It's usually quicker and it's fairly easy because you have it all online. You can track it there. However, to request your report of separation or do the record request online, you will have to have a premium DS login account. For example, your e-benefits account, then that login should qualify. But if you are limited to using a Health eVet account or an ID.me login account, those are not considered premium DS logins. They will not work. So when you go to the MilConnect website to do the online request, you will have to either upgrade or create a premium DS login account. If you have one or you have already created one, you can go to the web address shown on the screen. From there, you'll be on your home page and you need to click the correspondence/documentation option, and you'll have a option from drop-down menu at that point, it should be, where you can select your defense personnel records information, DPRIS, and that will take you to a new screen where you'll see tabs. One of those tabs should be your personnel file. Once you click on that tab, you should be able to select request my personnel file, and that will lead you to the form you complete in order to do those requests. Make sure you do click the documents you're requesting when you get to the document index section of the request. And finally, the last step is make sure you do click on the create and send request button. If you do that, then you should have your online request completed. However, if you're unable to access the internet or uncomfortable requesting your records that way, there is a process where you can do your record requests, especially the DD-214, by either fax or mail. So you're going to use the request pertaining to military records, or at least I recommend using that, and that's going to be the standard form SF-180, and you can send that for the DD-214 to the National Personnel Records Center, which is the center that currently has the restrictions we discussed. That's going to be the form they're most familiar with seeing. That's why I recommend it. It'll make sure you get all the information you need to provide to them in order for them to process your request. And you can get a copy of that form online at the National Records Archive site. I have the web address linked on the slide now. So you can download the form on that page, or if you're comfortable starting a request online, but you don't want to submit it online, you can click one of the options there to start the request. It'll help you fill out the form on the computer, and then at the end, you'll be able to print it where it's already typed in instead of handwritten, and you can then mail it to the correct location. Other ways to obtain the SF-180 are you should be able to get them from the Department of Defense, Federal Information Centers, your local Veterans Administration office, or any local veteran service organization should be able to help you by providing you a copy of that form. Out of those listed, I would recommend reaching out to your local Veterans Administration office or a resource center. They're going to be very familiar with requesting DD-214s, and they should be able to help you complete that and get it sent out fairly quickly. That's a very common form. So you'll complete the form, and then you can mail it to the address listed on the screen, National Personnel Records Center, 1 Archives Drive, St. Louis, zip code 63138. Or if you're comfortable using a fax, you can fax it to 314-801-9195. However, you're not required to use the SF-180 to request your separation report. You can also just do a written letter if you cannot obtain the form for some reason or you're having issues filling it out, but you need to include enough information in your letter to identify the records you're requesting and the veteran. So you should use the complete name used while they were in the service, particularly if they've had name changes, especially if those have not been updated on their DD-214. Requests should include their service number, or if you don't have that, at least their social security number, the branch of the military they served in, the dates they served, as well as their date and place of birth. Now, if the record was involved in the 1973 fire, Unfortunately, that was a fire that occurred at National Personnel Records Center. It destroyed approximately 16 to 18 million files that should have been affecting Army and Air Force veterans records from 1912 to 1964. You might have to provide more information if your record was affected by that in order for them to either process it or help recreate the record. That's just a warning in case you were serving in those branches within that date range. Usually the DD-214 requests are fairly quick. Before COVID, they were typically processed within 10 business days or 2 weeks. So that's going to be the quickest record you'll get returned back in most cases. Now, you can use the same form that we discussed for the DD-214, the standard form SF-180, to request your official military personnel file as well. So I would recommend getting your DD-214 first, and then you can have that to send copies with any other record request you need, including your personnel file to help identify it or fill out the form, or if you need to request specific clinical files or medical records from exact facilities. You can request some medical records with the standard form SF-180, and that's what we'll discuss later. But you might also have to just do a request with a specific facility the veteran was located at and treated. You will need to know the dates they were admitted, submit it to that facility, and they will have you sign a discharge or release form in that case. Regardless, like I said, for most cases, and what we're going to discuss today is just using the standard form SF-180 to request it. So the military personnel files are also typically free. However, if you're a next of kin requesting it or you have archival records being requested, there might be a small fee charged, and they will notify you that after the request. They won't have it before you submit the request, unfortunately. You'll have to submit it, and then they will notify you what the charge would be. So, like I said, 62 years older is when it's archival. Now, for next of kin can get more information on a veteran's records than would be publicly available. However, in order for that to apply, the veteran would have to be deceased, and you'd have to be one of the individuals in the list on the slide, which is an unremarried surviving spouse, a parent, a child, or brother or sister, and they will need to submit proof of death along with the form, proof of death of the veteran, in order to complete those requests. So you should start with obtaining your DD-214, then get a copy of the standard form SF-180 and complete it, and you'll have to send it after completing it out with your proof of death if needed to the correct address. Unfortunately, that's where it becomes a little more complicated than your DD-214. The place you'll send your record request will vary depending on the type of record you're requesting, the branch of military you served in, as well as the date of your discharge or separation, retirement, or if you're requesting for a deceased veteran who died in service, the date of their passing. Since there are enough categories that can be a little difficult to read, in order for convenience, I kind of broke it down where unfortunately I couldn't fit it all on the title slide. We're just going to go through the branches, and I will show where you can send the information. And all this will be located on the SF-180, by the way. It'll be on the 3rd page. The reason I'm listing it in these slides is because they decided to use 2 charts in order to try to convey all this information, where you have to use one chart finding the type of record, branch, and the date of separation or retirement, and then you'll find a number, and then you use a second chart once you find that number to get the actual address of the record center you're submitting the request to. I've kind of gone through both of those charts and tried to make it readable and combine them together. So you'll see here, this is what the chart looks like if you're requesting the records and you were in the Air Force, or the veteran whose records you're requesting was in the Air Force. On the left-hand side, you'll see the date of discharge, retirement, or passing, and then it's broken down based on the dates. And then there are 2 separate columns next to that, one for personnel records, and the other one is for medical or service treatment records. So if there is an address in that box, there are separate ones you submit them, and you need to follow this chart. For example, if an Air Force veteran was discharged or retired before, May 1st, 1994, and you want personnel records, that's a little more simple. Well, fortunately for that year, it's simpler because you can do the National Personnel Record Center for both requests. But if they were discharged after 1994, but before September 30th, 2004. Then where you send the request does vary, as you can see on the screen, depending on the type of record you're requesting. It's still the Personnel Record Center if you are requesting their personnel record, but if you're requesting medical or service treatment records, then it's going to be the Department of Veterans Affairs Records Management Center. So it's important that you get your DD-214, review it, find the chart for your branch of service, go down and find the correct date for your date of discharge, retirement, and passing, and then go over and send the request to the appropriate center for the personnel record or the military service treatment record. If you need both, you might have to send two SF-180s, complete them both and send one to each record center in order to obtain those records. There's also lists for people who are still active duty or temporary disability, retirement list, or there's a National Guard list as well if you're not on active duty. But like I said, this is designed more for veterans. However, I put the entire chart on these slides. So if you're doing the request, feel free to go to the slide that applies to your branch, find it, and then send it. And I might try to blow those up or add another link where they're a little larger or easier to read in the descriptions below this video. So look for a link if you're having a hard time reading it on the video itself, and we'll try to have those available on a separate page you can go to view. Unfortunately, as I discussed, the record requests are different for each branch. So that chart was only showing for individuals who served in the Air Force. If you're looking for a period of service where the veteran served in the Army, you'll need to use the following chart listed here. The Army chart's a little shorter, except they do have some periods of time where the dates depend on if you were an enlisted man or if you were an officer. Whichever category applies to the veterans whose records you're seeking, the dates do unfortunately vary for the Army. So you'll make sure you find the appropriate date of discharge or separation on the DD-214 and their rank. If someone is still enlisted, you'll do the first date listed at the top. If they were an officer, then you'll use the one below that, and I'll use the chart according to that. That's not going to matter if it were the requests that were after October 16th, 1992. Fortunately, at that point, they did consolidate where the records are sent. And like I said, find the date that applies on your DD-214, and then use this chart listed here for the Army. So like I said, on the video, you'll be able to pause it, take more time to review that, or if you can't read that, hopefully you can find it on the links we will provide. Now there is, once again, a separate chart for the Coast Guard. You can see here the list for veterans who served in the Coast Guard. It's the same process for each one. Like I said, unfortunately, they just all have unique addresses depending on the point in time. So more recently, they kind of had a few processes that varied on when and how they retired the records and who was the custodian of them. Unfortunately, that has created the bureaucracy you see and why it's so difficult to find the correct location to send it. If you're comfortable using the SF-180 itself, this is all on the third page. However, like I said, you will have to use two charts instead of just this one to find it. You'll just find the number and then go to the second chart, and the address will be listed similar here, except you'll see a number next to it on the top left-hand side of the second chart. Next, we have the request locations if the veteran served in the Marine Corps. So feel free to take time and review this chart. I do recommend if you're attending live, you don't have to be in a rush to try to write this down now. This will be published on our YouTube page, so you can view the video later. And like I said, we will try to have a link as well where you can see these charts blown up where they're a little easier to read in case you are having a hard time reading it on the screen currently, or you're having a hard time reading it on the video recording. And finally, we do have the list if the veteran served in the Navy. Once again, unfortunately, the Navy did have some different dates if you were an enlisted versus an officer. So you'll go based on rank at the time of separation for the period of service you're requesting, and you'll fill out these requests. And it is also a good time to note that some individuals will have multiple DD-214s if they had multiple periods of service. So you could have a period of service, completed your term, and then if you reenlist or apply, transfer to another branch, it is possible to have more than one DD-214. And you can also have different discharge characters on those forms, which might be important if you're applying for VA health benefits or health services. And you need to have an honorable discharge if you had an honorable discharge on one DD-214, but it is a different category of discharge on the other. You should request both DD-214s, and you may be able to just use the one with the honorable discharge in order to apply for those benefits and qualify. Okay, so next we have requesting replacement medals. Now this is a lot more consolidated. However, as you can see on the screen, there is a different process or address for the Coast Guard. So you just need to send a request in writing for your replacement medals. Once again, I think it's important you start with your DD-214 or your military personnel file to find the award you're trying to get a replacement medal for. That way you can identify it and make it a little easier for them to find it and send it on your request. In fact, you can just provide a copy of those documents along with your written request. If you're the veteran who's earned those medals you're requesting, you shouldn't have to pay. It's generally free. However, as discussed earlier, for next of kin or if they're archival records, there might be a small fee. So you'll send your written request if were in the Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, or Navy. All those will go to the National Personnel Records Center at the address listed on the screen. And you should be able to also start those requests online at the website listed at the bottom, which is the same web address listed earlier for requesting your personnel file or DD-214. Those are all on that same page linked on this screen. However, if you are requesting replacement medals for a veteran who served in the Coast Guard, you'll have to send your written request to the Coast Guard Personnel Service Center listed on the screen there in Arlington, Virginia. I don't believe there is an online request option for Coast Guard veterans. However, you can still just send it in writing, get a copy of your DD-214 or any military records you need to identify them. I recommend including it just to make sure it's easier for them to process and send those. So next isn't really a record per se, but I think it's important. If you qualify, you should go ahead and obtain your veteran health identification card. In order to qualify for one of those cards, you need to be enrolled in VA healthcare. So you need to first apply for VA healthcare. If you've already applied, or once you've applied and you do qualify, you should contact your nearest VA medical center and ask to speak with the enrollment coordinator to get your picture taken for your new veteran health identification card. You can do that to start it, or if you're more comfortable, you can wait until your next VA healthcare appointment, and you should be able to ask for assistance getting your card or your picture taken for the card at that appointment. That is up to you, whichever option you're more comfortable with. However, once you have an appointment to take the picture, it's important to make sure you bring a current and unexpired identification to your appointment. You can use your state issued driver's license, a US passport or passport card, or any other government ID as long as it's been issued by a federal, state, or local government agency, includes your picture, your date of birth, and it cannot be expired. If it's expired, they will not be able to accept it. Once you have done that, you should have your picture taken in order to obtain your card. If you've already obtained the card, but it's been lost or destroyed, you can request a replacement card by contacting the VA medical center where your picture was taken. Or if you've moved and you're no longer near that medical center, you can go ahead and call to request a replacement card by calling 877-222-8387. And that number should be open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. If you do qualify for the Veteran Health Identification Card, you should request that. It does have more uses. You can use it at the VA healthcare centers. However, if you do not qualify for VA healthcare and you still would like to have a Veteran Identification Card, so you can readily identify yourself as a veteran without needing to provide paperwork, such as your DD-214 to other parties, you can request that. Unfortunately, the request process for that is online, and you have to meet the requirements listed on the screen. So you have to have either served active duty in the reserves or in the National Guard, and you have to have received either an honorable or a general discharge under honorable conditions. If you had a discharge that is lower than that, such as a bad conduct or a dishonorable discharge or other than honorable conditions, any of those categories, you may have to first obtain a discharge upgrade or correction of military records before you can apply for the card. So that'll be one step you'll have to take before you can do your online application and get a DD-214 with the upgraded category. And we'll discuss how to do that after the break in the next section. So the online address for the application is listed there. It's the VA.gov website. If you type or can click the exact link there, it'll lead you directly to that website. The information you'll need for the application process is your social security number. You'll also have to have already obtained your DD-214 or equivalent, and you should make sure you have a copy or a scan of that document in either PDF, JPEG, or PNG format. So usually if you look at the file, you'll see dot and one of those initials. If it's not one of the initials listed there, you have it in the incorrect format, you'll have to save it in a different format or ask someone to help you convert that over to either PDF, JPEG, or PNG. You will also need a copy of a current and valid government issued ID. And then finally, you need a digital color photo of yourself from the shoulders up. Essentially, it needs to meet the requirements for a passport picture. Just a quick summary of the listed requirements. It's got to be your full front view, showing your face and neck, have no hat covering headphones or anything obscuring the view. It needs to be cropped from the shoulders up. You should have your eyes open, and you need to have a neutral expression. Dress probably won't be an issue, especially being shoulders up. However, just wear whatever you would wear to have an appropriate picture taken for your driver's license. Make sure the picture is in a square size, and it needs to have either a white or plain background. Don't have a landscape or anything fancy in the background. Keep it simple. Usually you can get pictures at places like CVS or Walgreens, anywhere that does photos that you can use for a passport. Those should work. If you can get one there where you get it on a USB drive or a disk where you have it in digital format, that should take care of these requirements. And the last requirements are, it does need to be recent. And by recent, they only require the picture have been taken within the last 10 years. And finally, the formats they accept for the picture are the JPEG, PNG, BMP, or TIFF formats. So you'll have to see what file type the picture is. Make sure it's one of those, or else you'll have to get it converted. Okay, so now we're going to take a little bit of a break if anyone has any questions. And just to start the question session, I do believe we had at least one submitted before this webinar began. And someone was asking about the Camp Lejeune water contamination. It sounds like that's really more related to an application for VA disability benefits. So if you're getting into that kind of question, that's a little more specific and case by case. If you're looking for that level of detail, you need to go ahead and apply for assistance and find an attorney, because they can look at your details, help you obtain the records, and make sure you will qualify. However, just to explain what that question is referring to, there was contaminated water for individuals who were stationed at Camp Lejeune. So if you were there for at least 30 cumulative days between August 1953 and December 1987, and you did not receive a dishonorable discharge, you may qualify for VA disability benefits if you have some listed conditions that you've been diagnosed with and you met those other requirements. If you think that does apply to you, you should seek assistance from an attorney. Now I'm going to check and see if we had any other questions come in and take a short break for you to submit those if you have them.
Thanks, Kory. And everyone, please do submit any questions that you have at this time, and Kory will either answer them now during once we complete the short break, or at the end of the presentation, depending on the time available. I did want to mention that someone did ask the question as to whether or not the slides themselves will be available. They'll be available on the video, but we will also link to a PDF of the slides so that you can look at them a little more closely after today's webcast is over. So I did want to answer that question. So we'll just let everybody take a short break because we are going to run out of time if we make it too long. And then Kory, you can start back. Right now we don't have any other questions, but we'll give it just 60 seconds or so for our attendees to ask any questions that they have for now.
Okay, do we have any other questions come in? If not, I think we can go ahead and continue.
Yeah, I was about to say we didn't have any other questions yet, so please do enter them in the question box here, and we'll try to answer those at the end of the presentation. Kory, let's go ahead and continue. Thanks.
Okay, so now that we talked about how to request some of the common military records and your ID cards, we are going to do a general overview of how you can correct or change your military records. So typically there are two different boards and two different forms you can use to file those requests. The first one is a discharge review board. Now it's important to note you have to do this first for any case where you qualify for both review boards. So this is where you want to usually start. And it's a good idea to start there if you can, because you might be able to use both boards to get multiple attempts at getting these approved if you qualify for both. However, the Discharge Review Board does have a strict statute of limitations or deadline for filing. So you need to file your request, have your application completed and submitted within 15 years from the date of discharge, retirement, or the point in time where the veteran has passed. These are usually going to be filed by the veteran, so it's usually your date of discharge. If you wait beyond 15 years, you have missed the statute of limitations. The Discharge Review Board for your branch cannot review that application. It will be denied. And there are separate review boards for each branch of the military. There is a review board for the Air Force, for the Army, the Coast Guard, and the Navy. The Navy does handle Discharge Review Board requests for Marines as well. So the Discharge Review Board generally has the ability to upgrade the character of your discharge, which is going to be, they can upgrade it to honorable, general discharge, other than honorable, upgrade it from bad conduct, or even dishonorable discharges. And they can change the reason or narrative stated for your discharge as well. However, there are limitations. The Discharge Review Board cannot alter a discharge from a general court-martial. So if you got a dishonorable discharge, which is usually going to occur at the general court-martial level, then you would not qualify for the Discharge Review Board. An additional limitation is if your discharge was issued by a special court-martial, for example, those can be issued, or bad conduct discharges can be issued through special court-martial. They may only change the characterization of your discharge, the bad conduct section or label, not the stated reason, and they will only do so for clemency reasons. So if usually there's been some kind of change in how those rules are applied, and it's not fair to keep that characterization for your discharge, they might be able to then upgrade the character from bad conduct to something higher, either other than honorable, general, or hopefully an honorable discharge. So those are limitations you have with the Discharge Review Board. Additionally, they can't alter other records, so they're kind of limited in the scope of what can be changed by a Discharge Review Board. And if you miss the deadline or you simply do not qualify for one of those reasons, then you would have to do a request for review by the board for correction of military records. Now, it's a little weird because that is the second option to get an upgrade or a correction of your records, but you'll see there on the screen, they have a 3-year deadline for filing that kind of request. So you need to do the 3-year deadline after the 15th-year deadline. That sounds a little confusing, and the reason for that is the deadline's not based on the date of separation for the correction of military record. An additional issue is that deadline can be waived, and usually it will be waived if you request it. They've kind of changed that so they're more lenient on granting those waivers. As long as your request has merit to it, they usually will grant it, or if you just specifically explain why you waited too long to file, they should waive it. The 3 years, though, doesn't start from the date of discharge or separation. It starts from when you knew about the error in your records. Unfortunately, for most cases, that will still be your date of separation. If you were discharged, you should know about it at the time you were discharged. However, you might find another error in your records when you request them later. For instance, there could be issues with dates or your name, something along those lines listed on your DD 214 or military records, which you become aware of after obtaining them years after your separation. In that case, it's 3 years from when you find out about it, when you get a copy of those erroneous records. Because of that, that's why it's really important you first obtain your records. One, you need to know which board is appropriate for your case so you can file in the correct board. Additionally, you need to know what the errors you're trying to correct are and be able to identify them. So make sure you get your DD 214 and get your personnel records. One, they help you identify the mistakes, and two, they're going to be a large part of your evidence you're submitting to justify the correction or help explain the situation. So that's just a broad overview of the two. I'm going to go into a little more details for each type of board and the request process for that. So first, the Discharge Review Board. In order to request review by a Discharge Review Board, you use the same form for every branch of the military, but like the record request, there are different locations you send them, and I'll show those on the next slide. However, first you need to find the form. The form is Form DD 293, which is titled An Application for Review of Discharge from the Armed Forces of the United States. Once again, you must complete that application within 15 years from the date of discharge listed on your separation paperwork. They cannot review a discharge or dismissal from a general court-martial. They also cannot alter a judgment of a court-martial beyond changing the character of the discharge. And if you're an officer, you're not receiving a discharge, it's just a dismissal. It's a different word, same concept, just in case anyone out there is looking and they were an officer when they were serving. So they will only do the change in the characterization from those court-martials when clemency is warranted. So just explain why justice or equity, why it would be fair, and they should grant the change in that characterization of discharge. Additionally, it's important to note it doesn't revoke the discharge or dismissal. You still received a discharge or dismissal. It's just changing the characterization as it's documented, which can be very helpful, one, for qualifying for certain benefits, such as the level of VA health benefits or VA services you may receive, or you may need it to qualify for disability benefits, depending on what type of discharge you have, particularly if you have currently a dishonorable discharge. You would want to get that corrected or upgraded if you can. Now on the form, you'll see there are actually two different options within the Discharge Review Board to request the review. And the first one's going to be a documentary record review. That's when they will go through the form and all of the supporting documents that are filed with that and simply review the records. And then they will make a decision based on those records. The other option is you can request a personal appearance hearing. If you do that, it's important to note you are responsible for travel expenses with the hearing, but you do have the opportunity to meet with a review board and then present your case in addition to the documents that were submitted to them. Now, generally, it's recommended that you start with a documentary record review request. The reason for that is you can do the documentary request. If you're denied, you can then request a personal appearance hearing. If you start with the personal appearance hearing and you're denied, you can't go back and request a document review. The logic for that is they're not going to want to just review your documents when they've already done that and given you the opportunity to present and appeal your case to them in person. It doesn't really make sense. They've already done that and more, so they're not going to do less and reach a different decision. So that's why it's a good idea to request first the document. If you're denied, then you can request your personal appearance hearing. Plus, if you're approved at the documentary level, then you don't have to worry about the expenses and travel in order to do your personal appearance hearing. So you can skip something that might not be required. One thing I do want to note here at this time is discharge upgrades are not automatic. There's not a certain amount of time that has to pass where you automatically qualify for one. There is a rumor that seems to be going around. Some veterans have been told this. I've never heard a good explanation for what started this rumor or any basis for it. I'm not aware of any military code, nor has any presenter or attorney or representative I've spoken with been able to explain what started that rumor. But I will say I've met veterans who were under the impression that they would automatically get a discharge upgrade after a certain amount of time passes. That's not true. You need to file your application for a discharge review board to get an upgrade, and you have to do that before the deadline passes. So if you're waiting because you thought it was automatically going to happen, that's not true. Make sure you don't miss your 15-year deadline, because you'll lose one option to get that correction or upgrade. And depending on how you do the request, you essentially lose 2 attempts at it. Because if you don't qualify for the discharge review board because you waited for 15 years, you don't get the documentary review and you don't get the personal appearance, which are 2 opportunities to argue your case. You'll be limited to the correction of military records, which reduces the odds that you're going to get the upgrade. Make sure you do your application, complete it, and I can't stress this enough, you do need to obtain your records before you file these requests. That way you have the opportunity to review it, see what is on the record, what accusations or disciplinary actions might be on your record, and know what you have to address and explain. It really helps you frame the issue for the review board so you can give them a better explanation of what happened and why it's not just or needs to be changed and corrected. They're not going to just grant the upgrade because amount of time has passed and you've been an upstanding citizen since your separation. You also want to explain why the separation characterization itself is not just. If there's been some change in law, you're discharged for a ground which is no longer a dischargeable offense, things like that you can explain. You could also explain if you had extenuating circumstances that weren't taken into consideration, such as you have documents to show you had some personal issue. Maybe you had post-traumatic stress disorder, which wasn't diagnosed at that time, and that led to your disciplinary actions because it wasn't fully understood or diagnosed, so they could be aware of that and treat you appropriately. Or potentially you had some family emergencies which was causing additional stress and resulted in some of your disciplinary actions. You need to find out what the disciplinary actions are and then get supporting documents that might be outside of the military records as well in order to frame that and explain it and create a good case on why it's fair that your characterization be upgraded and they give you an honorable or higher discharge characterization than you currently have. And once you've gathered all that, you completed the form, you talk to an attorney if you can. I do recommend doing so. Have a representative help you obtain these records and get the documents you need to frame it so it's going to have a higher chance of being approved. Take all those steps and then complete your form, submit your documents to the correct location. And the next chart is going to break down where you submit the request. So where you send the DD-293 in your documents is going to vary depending on the branch. There's 4 locations, or you can do online applications if you want to go look at those websites. They are all listed. You should be able to click those and links will provide, or a copy of the slide you'll be able to copy and paste the URL addresses there. For the Air Force, you can see it's the location listed in the Joint Base Andrews location. The Army is in Arlington, Virginia. Coast Guard is going to be in Washington, D.C. In the Navy, or if you're a Marine as well, it's going to be in the Washington Navy Yard. One important thing to note is the Navy does not offer traveling boards for personal appearance hearings. They're only held at the Washington Navy Yard. So if you do want a personal appearance hearing and you're appealing a discharge as a member of the Navy or a Marine, unfortunately, you will have to travel to the Washington Navy Yard. For other branches of the military, when you're requesting the personal appearance hearing, you can list your address or location, and they will try to schedule the personal appearance hearing as close as possible to the location you provide in the form. That's just not an option the Navy provides. Now, if you have already done a discharge review board and you want to appeal that decision, or if your discharge is not eligible for review by a discharge review board, then you need to use your correction of military records. The form to request that is the DD 149. That's the application for correction of military records. Just to summarize, that is a 3-year deadline from the date you discover the error, and it is waivable. Don't worry about the deadline if you're past 3 years. Just ask for the waiver and give an explanation why you're asking for the waiver. If you have any justification, list it. If not, you can simply request it based on the merit of your case. However, I do recommend including something more specific if you do have another reason why you missed the deadline. So the correction of military records can review a discharge review board's decision. So if you had made your timely appeals with the discharge review board, this essentially gives you a third shot at getting the correction because you went through your documentary request, you went through your personal appearance hearing, and if both of those were unfortunately denied, you can once again ask for that to be reviewed again by doing the correction of military records. They can also change the discharge to and from military retirement or medical discharge. They have the ability to upgrade general court-martial discharges, and they do have the ability to reinstate a veteran into the military, although I will note this is incredibly rare. It does not happen often at all. So with the correction of military records, you do have the option to request a personal hearing, a video hearing, or a document review. However, it's important to note the boards have discretion when they grant a hearing on the correction of military records, and in most cases, they do not grant you a hearing. So most of these are going to be based on the documents you submit, which is why it's very important to have all of your records in place and have them organized in a way to really appeal your case to the board and make it clear why they should grant the upgrade you're seeking. Or if you're trying to correct an error, you need to just clearly show that an error exists in your records and get it corrected. If you do get a hearing approved, once again, you as the veteran or the applicant are responsible for your own travel expenses. Those will not be paid. So as I've discussed a few times, you need to get supporting records that show why the record is an error or the discharge is unjust as it currently exists. Give that explanation with a request for a waiver if you missed the deadline. At the very least, have the explanation of why it should be granted, and then ask the board to waive the deadline because you have a meritorious or a good claim. And it's also important to note, this is just a broad overview. It does not replace representation by an attorney or representative, and the procedures can vary slightly between the branches. So it's very important to apply for assistance in both obtaining your records and making these requests. If you have not done so, I recommend you seek assistance in either of those matters first. However, if you're unable to provide it or find assistance, or if you choose not to, you can do so yourself. Just please do yourself a favor and get your records, have everything together, and frame it before you file your request within the deadlines. That way you improve your odds of succeeding. Now, once you've completed your DD 149 and you have your supporting documents and everything prepared, you will need to send it depending on the branch you served in, the branch whose separation you're trying to correct. Here's the chart. Once again, it's broken down in the same categories as the review boards, but the addresses are different. And once again, if you're a Marine, you will submit it to the same location as the Navy. Finally, I have listed in this slide the South Carolina Legal Services office locations. The reason I have all these listed here are these are offices throughout the state. We are a statewide law firm. I'm personally within our Charleston office, but we have attorneys who can assist you throughout the estate in all 9 offices listed here, as well as our intake office, which is the phone line that'll be shown again at the end, as well as the beginning. If you have an emergency deadline, you do not have to go through our normal intake line. So if you have a case or a deadline that's approaching quickly, like 30 days or less, then you're in an emergency situation. You might want to go ahead and contact the closest office to you based on this list. You'll see the physical addresses of the offices there, as well as the main office lines to contact those offices. And explain you have an emergency if you do call the offices directly. That way they realize they're to do the intakes, and they'll take that information from you and get you to the appropriate person. Otherwise, they might just refer you to our online or phone application process. So it's important just to let them know it is an emergency, and that's why you're calling them. Okay, so that is it for my presentation. I'm going to let Susan take over, and then she will go through our closing information, and then we can take any questions if anyone attending does have additional questions at this time.
All right, thanks so much, Kory. I want to thank you for an excellent and thorough presentation about correcting military records and a few other little things thrown in. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. We do truly appreciate your interest in this subject matter as well as the others that we cover. I want you to remember that Level Up Law is a series of free webcasts that we do to educate the public on some of the most common legal issues that we see here at South Carolina Legal Services. You can join us every Tuesday at noon, and remember you can find this presentation and all of the previous Level Up Law webcasts on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search South Carolina Legal Services and go to the Level Up Law playlist. And be sure while you're there to like, share, and be sure to subscribe so you'll get a notification when we post each episode. So, but also, of course, give us a day or two to get this one uploaded and you can listen again. And remember, we will link to a PDF of the slides that Kory provided today, as well as some larger slides for some of the information that's so detailed. It'll be a little bit easier to see. All right, now if you have an issue and you need legal assistance, as Kory said, and you can't afford a lawyer, you might be eligible for our free legal representation. And we gave some detail about how you can be eligible for our services at the beginning. But we do want you to apply for help here at South Carolina Legal Services. And for those who are just listening and not watching today, that toll-free number is 888-346-5592. Between the hours of 9 and 6, Monday through Thursday, our staff in that intake office are standing by. We have great staff in there. And also remember that it's very important. You can also apply online, as Kory mentioned, at lawhelp.org/SC. And we actually now have a Level Up Law episode on our YouTube playlist for Level Up Law that walks you through tips about how to apply online. So if you have any difficulty, you can be sure to check that out. And we also invite you to check out all of our online resources to find information that you may need on this and other subjects. An easy way to see what's coming up each week on Level Up Law is to check our South Carolina Legal Services Facebook page, or you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and maybe you should do all three. Next week, we will be talking about how to get your real ID. Are you prepared? If not, you're going to find out what you need to be prepared to get that real ID and some of the things that you might run into along the way. So thanks for tuning in to Level Up Law today. We don't have any further questions, and that's probably a good thing because our time is up. We look forward to having you back with us next week. Thanks everybody for joining in, and again, thanks to Kory for a great presentation. That concludes today's webinar.